Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I wanted to share with you some of my reflections from May, some of the things that I did, the decks that I worked with, and we'll take a look at some of the journal pages I created. So one of the exciting things in May, which is totally not tarot related, but I'm going to throw it in here because it is one of the things that I'm absolutely loving, is my Wonderland 222 vertical planner. I'll just kind of give you a quick peek at one of the weeks. If you want to see a whole video of me talking about this planner and what I use it for, you can check out that planning update on my other channel, which I'll leave a link for in the description box below for you. But you can see here that I kind of have my list of things that I want to be talking about today. So real quick, I just want to share with you a couple of thoughts and memories from the month before we jump into the decks that I worked with. I did get a chance to participate in a live chat with my Thoth study buddies over on Lisa Pepez's channel. That was a lot of fun to get to hang out. We have a little study group that we kind of work together and support each other in our Thoth studies, and we all got together on Lisa's channel and had a talk about the Thoth. So that was a lot of fun. I'll leave that linked for you in the description box below. So then in my membership, I also did a little bit of a challenge for myself where I did all of my member videos unedited. And I also did a live there. So it was really fun to kind of challenge myself and work through some of the things that I do still struggle with. One of them is my own imperfections. And so doing an entire month of unedited videos for my members, as in like zero editing, whatever happened on camera stayed on camera. It was a lot of fun, and definitely I think the format that I'm going to be using moving forward in that space, even though it's not on my list. We did have COVID. Anyway, that was a bit of a bummer, and that did kind of take a little bit of a toll on some of the things that I wanted to do in the month of May, but that's okay. You know, it happens, and I am no stranger to health issues, so, you know, I just roll with it. I do have my FOMO deck here, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. It's not this deck. That's not a FOMO deck at all. I did also want to mention real quick, so one of my friends, also from my Thoth study group, Marlena, finally launched a channel. She's been doing some absolutely fantastic videos talking about why she works with the tarot. She has a whole Why I Tarot series. She talks about why she oracles. I definitely encourage you to check that out. I'm going to leave a link for that in the description box below for you. Okay, so that's kind of just my quick, like, here's what I did. I was mostly sick, so there really isn't a lot of here's what I did. The biggest thing that I was most excited about, non-tarot related, was working in this planner. Again, I have a full video on that on my other channel if you want to check it out. Before we talk about the decks I worked with, let's talk about my FOMO deck. This is the Trionfi della Luna Illustrated Pips edition. So I did a completely unfiltered unboxing of this for my members because as soon as I got this deck in hand, to be honest, as soon as I saw the box, I was like, oh, nope, not for me. Not for me. I think I even called the video Not My Cup of Tea Trionfi, because this deck, I think this is from the upcoming Deviant Moon Oracle. I'm sure everybody has seen this deck by now. It was a highly anticipated deck. I'm not going to do too much of a flip through of it because there's lots and lots of videos out on this. But what I wanted to talk about was this was my full-on FOMO deck, as in I pre-ordered this deck, right? And it was the whole sight unseen. Patrick Valenza. I have a lot of respect for his artwork, and I think he's got some serious mad marketing skills. But this was a whole like thing. People were pre-ordering it because you had to order it sight unseen. And there was like that whole only so many copies of it and that kind of thing. So at the time that I found out about this deck was about the time that I was doing that work with the Deviant Moon, however many months ago that was. I no longer have the Deviant Moon. If you saw my deck declutter videos, you might notice that was in there, and it did end up finding a new home. And I pre-ordered this out of a total FOMO moment, as in, and FOMO, if you're unfamiliar with it, is fear of missing out. I was so afraid that I would love the Deviant Moon, like after I actually worked with it, and that I would want this deck, and there was only going to be so many copies of it out, and that I was going to miss out on it, right? So I totally succumbed to the whole FOMO thing, and this, I have purchased hundreds of decks in my many years of reading tarot. Hundreds of decks. This is the only deck that I truly regret purchasing, and it's not against anything against the deck itself. The deck itself is fine. It's not my thing. It's not my cup of tea. I felt like if I didn't buy it then, I might never get the chance to, and so I panic bought. And that is never how I want to interact with a deck. That's never what I want my first interaction with a deck to be. This deck has been a really good lesson for me to not let myself do that. And I do have to say that it's honestly the first time I've ever truly FOMO bought a deck. I mean, I will joke about, oh, this was a FOMO purchase, but this was a true panic buy. And that is definitely not the experience I want to have with this deck. And it is the only deck that I truly regret purchasing. Again, nothing against the deck or the creator. This has just been my own personal experience with it and the lesson that I learned. So that was my one big deck disappointment for the month of May. All right, so moving on to happier things. Let's talk about the main deck that I worked with all throughout May, and this is the Gaian Tarot. So this deck, I think I purchased last year, and it's always been one of those that's on my list to work with, right? And I had just never kind of gotten around to it. I did originally, I think at the beginning of this year, I did a mod with me. It may have been last year. I'll try to find it and link it for you. This is the Schiffer edition that had the blue borders around the outside. So I originally did my first mod with it and I took the blue borders off. When I started to actually work with this deck this month, I realized that it was still too big and bulky for me to work with. So I took the white off as well and just took it down to the artwork on 3 sides, leaving the titles on the bottom. Here's what the backs ended up looking like. I do still have the white line along the bottom because if I cut that off, I would end up cutting into the words, and I need the words on this deck. So I do think the backs still look quite nice. It's a much better size for me now. It's a little bit closer to traditional tarot size. It's still a little bit of an oversized deck. It is definitely that shiny, if I can get it to catch the window, it's definitely that shiny Schiffer cardstock. It was much stickier when I first got it, but it is kind of softening up and not sticking as bad now. It's definitely a harder deck for me to work with, but in terms of physically working with it because of the size and the glossy cardstock. And again, it's kind of a chunker, but I have really enjoyed working with this deck. I absolutely love the imagery. I love that it is full of all of these real life people, and it's not photographs, which is totally interesting. It's just stunning artwork in this deck. But it's definitely in line with, as it says, the Gaian Tarot, healing the earth, healing ourselves. I find this to definitely be a really wonderful kind of mothering style deck, as in mothering ourselves, mothering the earth, mothering each other, in terms of that caretaker aspect, which I think is absolutely lovely. It's definitely a deck that I felt like really tapped into that Taurus energy, that part of myself. I guess that was also kind of a memory from May. I mean, it was my birthday. It wasn't like a big one or anything, but my birthday is in May, so it was kind of fun to work with a deck. And one of the reasons that I chose the Gaian Tarot was because it was a deck that I felt like would connect with me on that kind of Taurus level. And so I thought that would just be interesting, given that, it was my birth month and all of that. And it's so beautiful. I love working with it. I love the diversity in this deck. We have different ages represented. We have different cultures represented. We have different body sizes represented. It's so beautiful. It really does feel like a deck of humanity. And it was just a really nice, supportive way to interact with my tarot this month, particularly because I was sick. So this deck was really fantastic for kind of giving me that nurturing, supportive energy that I needed. But it does have some cards that will challenge you, that will kind of keep you on your toes a little bit and require you to kind of look a little bit deeper. And I think it's quite wonderful for that. Such a beautiful card. Look at this, 7 of Earth. It's a stunning deck. And I think this is one of those decks, I did have to kind of cut off this orca's face a little bit, which did, I'll be honest, break my heart just a little bit. But I need to be able to work with the deck. So it was just too big for me to be able to work with before, even with the blue borders trimmed off. So having it be, you know, much closer to tarot size really worked well. For the most part, I think that was about the only thing that really kind of suffered in my trimming it down even more, because I did have to go into the artwork a little bit, but it's so much easier for me to work with now. One of the things that was really fantastic about working with this deck is this guidebook. Oh my gosh, this guidebook is amazing. So this guidebook is a really easy reader, which is fantastic. We get a little bit about the cards, we get about what we're seeing on the cards, we get a little bit about what this card means when it comes up in a reading. We have the shadow side of the card, which is fantastic, themes of the card, and then symbols that we see in the card itself, which is absolutely fantastic. I love that. This deck does also take a very numerological and elemental approach to the minor arcana, which is definitely in alignment with how I read. And so this deck and this guidebook really does align quite closely with the way that I read tarot. And so it's always exciting for me when I find a deck and guidebook that actually address the numerological and elemental associations within the tarot, because that is a huge part of the way that I read, and it's very important to the way that I read. So I really appreciate when I find decks that actually tie that in. There's so much beautiful depth within these images and within the people depicted and the energy of the cards. And yeah, I've really, really enjoyed my time with it. It's definitely one that I will be getting into again. So this was the deck that I was using for my main kind of week ahead style readings. And the oracle deck that I was pairing that with was the Earth Wisdom Oracle. Now this is one of my favorite and probably most used oracle decks beyond my botanical decks, because those ones are probably my most used. This one does have botanicals in it as well, which is fantastic. But let's just do our little split here. So I did really enjoy working with this, with the Earth Wisdom Oracle. We have that kind of darker imagery in the center with this oracle deck, because a lot of the cards in this deck are in the darker side in terms of like the printing is darker, you know, not like shadowy or bad or anything, or any sort of negative connotation, but darker as in the actual like coloration of the deck is darker. So when you compare that to kind of the little bit lighter imagery in the Gaian Tarot, it does kind of create this really interesting balance. I feel like the art styles are actually quite compatible. And the Earth Wisdom Oracle is also a very earth-centered deck, and we do have information about the plants that we see in the deck as well, and the crystal that is in the deck as well. So that's always fantastic because you can tie those in. There's wonderful little write-ups in the guidebook, so I definitely got into each of those a little bit. But I felt like they paired together really well. The keywords are really wonderful on the Earth Wisdom Oracle. I know I've talked about this deck many times. It's a deck I use in a lot of different pairings because the artwork is stunning, the little guidebook is fantastic, and the keywords are very clear and to the point. So I don't ever really struggle with what a card means or what I'm looking at. And I really appreciate that about this particular pairing. So I feel like they work together really well. They're both very kind of earthy, a little bit pagan. The Earth Wisdom Oracle kind of feels like it inhabits maybe wisdom from the past, whereas the Gaian Tarot feels like it inhabits more of the wisdom of today. So there was a little bit of pulling in some ancestral energy as well into kind of almost like this grandmother energy and mother energy that we're getting through these two decks, which is quite cool. I kind of feel like the Earth Wisdom was offering that that kind of ancestral energy, and then the Gaian was complementing that with kind of that energy from how do you take that wisdom from the past and make use of it in the future. I think that's kind of a wonderful way that these decks work together, as well as just kind of being aesthetically pleasing and beautiful, and the messages really flow together really well between these two decks. So the next deck that I worked with throughout May was the True Heart Intuitive Tarot. Now I do have a full video on this deck kind of talking about, you know, the different ways that I've worked with it and kind of my thoughts in coming away from my work with this deck. This was a deck, as I mentioned in that video, that I didn't really have any intention of actually using the cards. I have trimmed my copy. It does come with a small white border around it, but I just felt like that little border needed to be removed. The deck was kind of a little bit chunky for me too, a little bit large. It's got that thicker cardboardy cardstock that I'm just not a fan of. So sometimes trimming it, making a little bit smaller helps. But again, just, you know, in all honesty, this was not a deck that I ever intended to work with. I just wanted to read the guidebook, and that was really all it was. It's a mass market deck. It's readily available. It's often on sale on Amazon. And so I picked it up and was like, I'm just gonna go ahead and read the guidebook. And I didn't have any intention of working with the cards. But then I was trimming another deck, so I went ahead and trimmed it. And then I was like, maybe I'll use it for my Sunday readings, because there's just simple 3-card readings. And it worked really well because this is very simple artwork. And I enjoyed working with it. There are some cards in this deck that I really, really enjoy. There are some cards in this deck that do some really interesting things. Overall, it's not really a deck that I would say is like my aesthetic, right? It's one of those that I'm like, I appreciate it, I like it well enough, but it's not something that I get super excited to pull out and use. I do, however, enjoy working with it, and I did enjoy my time with it, and it has earned itself a place in my tarot library. I love the Six of Swords. Again, some of these cards do some really fantastic things. I talk about that more in that video, so I'll leave that linked for you in case you want to check that out. So I have, again, like I said, I have modified mine, so I've trimmed it, I've edged it, and here's the backs, which are definitely not my favorite. I feel like they don't match. We've got this beautiful, like, sky blue color and all the beautiful colors that we see in the full card, and I feel like the backs could have tapped into that, but again, that's just my personal opinion. The guidebook for this deck is really fantastic. I won't go into it too much because I did do a whole video on it, but I really enjoyed reading this guidebook. One of the things that I enjoyed most about this guidebook was the biography sections that Rachel True has included in the Major Arcana, where she kind of talks about different instances in her life and situations in her life that kind of relate to the different card that we're looking at. So I did quite enjoy that. It was fun to read those. And I do like the numerological and elemental approach that she takes to the minors. There were a couple of discrepancies, as I mentioned in that other video, but for the most part, I think it does include them quite well while still sticking with the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith. It's a really good guidebook. It's definitely one I would recommend for somebody new to tarot, because one of the things about the including the biography in there is that it does kind of allow you to see how somebody can take a tarot card and relate it to their real life, which can sometimes be a challenge for people. So I think that's quite an interesting perspective that this book offers. But overall, you know, I enjoyed working with it for my Sunday readings. Again, simple readings. They were simple 3-card readings, and I feel like this deck did work quite well for that. It's not my favorite, I'll be honest, but I enjoyed working with it, and it's definitely one that I'm going to hang on to for a while. So speaking of decks, I did a video on. Let's talk about the Alice the Wonderland Oracle, because I had so much fun with this deck. And I'm going to talk about the decks that I used it with because they were a lot of fun too. I did end up edging this deck. Again, I've done a whole video of playing with this deck and showing you how I've been working with it. I did end up edging it in pink. I said I was going to do that in the video, and I did, and it's been fantastic. So one of the things about this deck is that I do like Jasmine Beckett Griffith artwork. So this has her artwork, and the guidebook is by Lucy Cavendish, and the guidebook is quite lovely. I do really enjoy the guidebook, and I have read it at this point now that I've had a whole month to work with this deck. I do enjoy the artwork, but as I mentioned in that video on this deck, the thing that really gets me about this deck is the keywords and the key phrases on it. They are so spot on, and I really had a fantastic time playing with this deck and working with it in some dream work, which was absolutely fantastic. I did some fun readings with it as well. So as charming as these illustrations are, and I do have to say that the more I've worked with this deck, the more I've come to enjoy these illustrations. In fact, I have bought another one of Lucy Cavendish, Jasmine Beckett Griffith collaboration decks. I'm not going to tell you which one because we'll save that for later, but I did end up buying another one because I really did enjoy this deck to the point where I was like, I need more of this. I need more of this in different energies, in different worlds. And I love that it has the Alice vibe to it. I love that it kind of invites us into that space. And I have really come around to enjoying this artwork and to appreciating it in that sense as well. I do really enjoy the guidebook too. I've been working with that a bit more than I originally had, but really it is all about the keywords in this deck. They are different than other Oracle decks that I have, and I really enjoy that. Now I'm not going to do the whole like side-by-side flip through thing because that was kind of the main focus of the video that I did talking about this deck, but I do want to talk about the two decks, the two primary decks that I worked with this particular deck. The first being the Cosmic Slumber Tarot. I hate this box. I'm sorry. I know. I've got fabric to make a bag for it because I hate these boxes. I mentioned this deck in that video. This is the Cosmic Slumber Tarot. I think I already said that, but that's okay. This deck, I wasn't sure what I was going to think about it when I originally got it. I got it for dream work. And I think I've mentioned this deck in a couple videos now because it's been one that I've been working with for the last couple months. But I really enjoy the colors, the landscape, this dreamlike kind of strange, a little bit wonderlandy energy of the Cosmic Slumber Tarot. I haven't really had any luck with any of the other Liminal 11 decks, but this one works for me and I like it and I enjoy it. And it's been really wonderful to use for dream work, which has been primarily how I've been working with it. And I've been pairing it with the Alice the Wonderland Tarot, and it's been absolutely fantastic. Again, if you want to see the whole flip together with these two decks, definitely go check out that video. I won't do that again here because that's kind of, I kind of already did it. But I did really enjoy working with these two decks together. Even though the art styles are completely different, the energy is a little bit the same. It's kind of taking us to this strange dreamscape of a world, this kind of like Wonderland style of, this kind of Wonderland energy. And I feel like this deck works really, really well for that. And I've really enjoyed working with it. It's kind of making its way up there as some of my favorite decks. I have kept the extra cards in it, which are quite interesting. But there's just something about this art style that kind of gets me, and it's so not my thing, right? So yeah, this has been a really interesting one. I've really enjoyed my work with it, and I just think it's so cool. And I love the colors. Like, look at all these colors. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm excited to have it. It worked really well with the Wonderland deck, and I do feel like they complement each other well, but I have used this deck all on its own as well for dream style work, as well as just kind of, I don't know, when I feel like I need to tap into that kind of an energy, this is a wonderful deck for that. So the other deck that I've been working with alongside the Alice the Wonderland is the Joy to Vive Tarot by Paulina Cassidy. This was a deck that I bought because I was sick, and I don't know. I wanted something to make me feel better. Let's just be honest about it. I was laying in bed, like watching videos, and I felt like crap, and I just wanted something to make me feel better. I love Paulina Cassidy decks, but I'm quite attached to her Paulina Tarot, and I've rehomed some of the other decks because I feel like that's the Paulina Cassidy deck that's mine, that's for me. And so I wasn't sure about this one. When I first saw it come out and everything, and I never did get around to getting it, but I wanted a deck that I'm like, I know is gonna make me feel better. It's gonna bring a smile to my face, and that's what I was looking for. And this deck certainly does that. It's like full of joy. It feels like walking into this almost kind of circus energy, which is kind of fitting because I'm currently reading the Night Circus by, is it Erin Morgenstern, I think? Also, there's a tarot deck. Side note, if you enjoy that book, there's a tarot deck coming. I think it said, I want to say November of this year. I've got it saved on my Amazon. I have learned my lesson and I do not pre-order Amazon decks anymore, just a little side note, because I pre-ordered the Woodland Wardens and it came with issues, like printing issues. And because I had pre-ordered it so many months ahead of time, my return window had closed. So I couldn't return it and get a different copy. I'm sure I could reach out to the publisher and all that, but for a mass market deck, I've learned my lesson. There's no need to rush and pre-order. I just have it on my list so that I know when it comes out so I can just purchase it then, because that's definitely a deck I'm planning on getting because I am enjoying the heck out of reading the Night Circus. Anyway, this deck kind of ties into that a little bit. It's got a little bit of that circus energy. In fact, there's another circus deck that I've ordered because I'm kind of like in that space of loving this fun, playful energy. Even though this isn't really bright, vivid colors like we see here in the Cosmic Slumber, it does have a really fun energy to it. It has a really great kind of uplifting vibe. It's a lot of fun, and it does kind of remind me of like going to the circus, you know, and stepping into this other world for a time. I love the Seven of Cups. I do absolutely love Paulina Cassidy's artwork. I feel like her name has changed. I feel like it's Paulina Faye now, but I don't have her newest deck to tell you for sure. But anyway, I love this. And the whole point of this deck was to bring me a little bit of joy because things were not fabulous. You know, I was sick in bed for over a week, and it was, you know, of course, a struggle time because, you know, COVID sucks. But this deck was kind of my comfort during that time, and it did bring me a lot of joy, and I really did enjoy working with it. And I did a lot of readings with this deck just, you know, during that time, just, you know, laying in bed, me and the joie de vivre, hanging out. But when I was feeling better, I did end up doing some work with it alongside the Alice the Wonderland Oracle, and they do actually go together really well. I did also pair this deck with the Divine Circus, which is an oracle deck that I talked about last month. And I think I have a video on that one as well, so if you want to check that out. It did pair really well with the Divine Circus too, so that was quite interesting. I didn't do a ton of work with those two together, so I'm not going to drag that one out here because it's not really a deck I worked with in May. It was just a deck that I used occasionally for a few different readings in May. So again, those were some of the decks that I did for some kind of dream work, some just happy moments work, just kind of trying to pull a little bit of color, a little bit of curiosity, a little bit of play into my work for the month. So to wrap things up, let's talk about the two decks that I worked with for my Weaver's Monthly Medicine, which is a guided tarot practice that I do in the membership portion of my channel. And for the month of May, we did something really interesting. We did inner temple visualizations along with working with elemental energies. Now, the visualization portion was totally optional, and some people chose to opt out of that, and some people chose to integrate that into their practice, which was really fantastic. I did a little bit of both because, again, I was sick through about half of May, so I didn't do the full extent of the practice myself. But the deck that I ended up working with is the Gentle Tarot paired with the Roots and Wings. This is my new linen edition, and oh my gosh, I am in love with this edition. This is my favorite edition now. It shuffles beautifully. It's the greatest size. I have edged it in this kind of beautiful light brown color to catch that center part of the shell there. Oh my goodness, I love this deck so much. It's one of my favorites. It's a soul deck, to be sure. I started out working with this deck because our first week was working with the element of earth. So I thought this is the perfect deck for my earth element. And I fully intended to swap decks for every element because we did earth, a week of earth, a week of air, a week of water, and wrapped up with a week of fire. And I fully intended to like pick a different oracle and tarot deck each week to tap into those elemental energies and represent that energy, and that didn't happen, and that's okay. And I just ended up working with the Gentle Tarot through the whole month, which is fine. This is a deck that I resonate with on a very deep and personal level. I do feel that it has all of the elements represented in it as well. We get earth, we get air, we get fire, and we get water, and the minor arcana themselves are kind of based in that elemental energy. So it actually ended up working really well, even though it would have been totally fun to be able to swap my decks every week for their elemental energies. I just didn't have the physical energy to do that. So I just stuck with this one, and it actually ended up working beautifully for all of the different readings that we did. And then I paired that with my Roots and Wings, which is just one of my favorite oracle decks. These two decks pair together beautifully. I do have two different copies of this because I have this kind of original one in the full size, and then I also have the mini one, which I pair with the mini A Gentle Tarot, as well as the several of my other mini decks. It's kind of like my mini oracle that goes with all of my mini tarot decks. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about this deck, is that it's very balanced, it's very neutral, and it goes with just about anything I throw at it. So it's one of those really beautiful all-rounder decks that can kind of work in any way that you need it to. I really love the simple keywords. I adore the illustrations. I so hope this creator creates a tarot deck at some point. That would be fantastic. I would love to see that happen. I do really enjoy the little write-ups in the little pamphlet as well. I think they're quite wonderful, and I do often pull those into my readings with this deck. But again, I think this is one that just, works beautifully with the Gentle Tarot. And it was so funny because when I was shuffling this deck and I was using it for the fire reading, so at the beginning of the week, we pulled an Oracle card or a card. I chose to use Oracle to give us our energy for the week. And as I was shuffling this deck, I was thinking, man, I should be using like a deck that's way more fiery. Like I should just go switch, but I didn't. I ended up using this one. And if I can find it, and I ended up pulling this card. So this was my guiding energy for the week of fire, which isn't that just appropriate? The Sun. So as I was kind of like shuffling and like thinking I should be using a different deck, no, but this deck was like, oh no, we'll be fine. We'll work together just fine. Here's the Sun to prove it. Have all the fiery energy right here. So it was really beautiful working with these two decks together. So let's talk a little bit about my digital tarot journal. And you may notice this looks a little bit different because one of the things that I did while I was sick in bed, like when I kind of started feeling a little bit better, when I started getting a little bit more energy, like I started getting bored. Like there's only so much TV I can watch. There's only so many books I can read, and sometimes my attention span wasn't really there for reading. So I feel like I'm lopsided. Sorry. So one of the things that I did was actually redesign my entire digital tarot journal. This time I'm calling it a tarot planner because that's kind of what it ended up being. So this is the cover, and you can see that I've added design elements. I put my table in here and everything. I've also added some quick links. So this notes blocks here, which is all my little stamps, goes to the notes section. This little tab here, this little bookmark here, always goes back to my index page. And so those are kind of just ingrained little quick links. So here's my index page, and I've basically created a tarot planner for myself because you can see down here I have monthly tabs for all my monthly journaling, and I've also created 3 sections as well as a notes section. So each of these 3 sections I am going to be putting in my year ahead spread, which I do still need to add in here. I haven't gotten that in yet. And it does like go right to that section if I click on it. So you can see here, it'll jump right to it, and I obviously don't have it in there yet. So if I click on the little flower there, it takes me back to the index. So it's just a little bookmark that I put in there. So I have my working decks and my decks to connect, and then I have some lines here and some pages, again, note pages if I want to copy those. So one of the things that I ended up doing was creating this whole tarot planner, and then what I ended up doing is actually transferring all of my readings from the first 4 months of the year because I was in bed for many, many days and I had plenty of time to do that. So We'll just take a quick flip through it. There's the year ahead, which I don't have in here yet. Then I have the working deck section. So the thing is that I can change these sections out if I really, really want to. So if I decide I don't want to do my working decks here in this section, I can delete all this and put something else in that place in the second section of the planner. So I just put a nice big image here of the She-Wolf Tarot because I really enjoy that deck. And I started a list here of my favorites each month. So that I can kind of look and do a quick look back at all of the favorite decks that I've worked with so far. And then I've got a page for each of the months so that I can note the decks that I worked with. Some of them I still do need to fill in because, again, this is still kind of a work in progress. But you can see here's all the decks I worked with for my main decks for January, my monthly medicine decks, and the decks I used for my moon readings. And so I have that for, you know, every month. And I have my decks to connect, which is basically the decks that I want to work with. I put a nice, beautiful picture of the Thoth in there. And then I'm just basically, anytime I get a new deck that I'm like, I really want to spend some time working with this deck, not just like a, I don't know, not like a Joie de Vivre style deck, right? As in, I don't need to really get to know this deck or understand this deck or dive deep into that deck. It's just one that I can pick up and start reading with. A lot of these decks are more decks that I'm like, I feel like I need more dedicated time with them. And so a lot of these came from my original video of decks I want to work with in 2022. And then as I'm working with them, I'm just highlighting them so that I can continue to add to this list throughout the year, but then also just highlight and note the ones that I've actually worked with. So then we move into my monthly pages, and I literally copied and pasted all the content from every single page from my last digital journal that I had. This is now my updated one. If anybody is interested, I will put this up in my shop. You can purchase a copy for yourself. So I'll leave a link for that below. But anyway, I have it for January. I did it for February, where again, I literally copied and pasted. And I'll tell you, it wasn't super quick. But because I can just mass select the whole page, like just draw a big old circle around it and copy all the content on the page and then paste it into the other document, I was just basically dropping back and forth between the two. So it wasn't too bad. But it did take a little bit of time and effort, so there was some dedication there. So here's all the pages we saw in March. All the pages for April. I did end up having to kind of redo a little bit of my sort of intro pages because in my other tarot journal that I had, it's a full page, not divided up like an actual planner like this where we can see the two halves of the page. I kind of mocked up a half page on those, but I like this layout better because it gives me two very clearly defined pages and it looks like an actual journal, right? Or an actual planner, which is fun. So yeah, I copied all those over. There's that big month ahead spread I did. So let's take a look at May. It may take a moment to load because I did do quite a bit of drawing in here in May. So we have my cover page, the decks that I worked with, and then I put this little calendar in here that also has any Sabbats or and the moon phases in here. So just so I have reference for them. So here was my moving into May, which was a spread that I did with the Gaian Tarot. I did a lot more journaling, and that's the thing that I really do like about this particular setup is that I have kind of a couple of different template layouts for the notes pages that I can just quickly add in and out as I need to. And I do like the lined paper because then I feel like I can write more on it. And it worked really well. So here's that reading. Then every week I did a week ahead. This one I just used the Gaian Tarot, and basically how I did this one was that because I was getting to know this deck at the beginning of the week, I pulled my cards and I included write-ups from the guidebook. And then you'll see later on in the week, I go back and add my own interpretations. So there's that from the guidebook, because again, I was getting to know this deck and getting to know the guidebook. So you'll see here that this was my follow-up. I think this was when I was starting to not feel so great. But at the end of the week, I basically did how that 3-card reading reflected throughout my week and what I thought about it. And again, this is like my own interpretations. And then here is kind of like from the book, which is a great way to kind of get to know a deck and to work with the guidebook and the cards together. So then we have my first Sunday reading where I was using the True Heart Intuitive Tarot. I just pull these little images off my Facebook group, and then I have my cards and my reflection. Again, another week ahead spread. This is where I started including the Earth Wisdom Oracle. So information from those little guidebooks to kind of be the thing that I'm going to be on the lookout for this week. Then I did a little moment spread with a joie de vivre, which is really fun. This is one that I think was on my Instagram at one point. I probably still have it somewhere on my website. Then we have my this week. So that was my kind of reflection for, it's really hard for me to see. I have the writing thing on it, the writing film over the top of this, so it's hard for me to see it. But this was my reflections for this week. Then I have my Sunday spread with the True Heart Intuitive, and then, you know, so on and so forth, just repeating that same pattern. This was the week ahead for the next week with, again, the Gaian and the Earth Wisdom Oracle. This was a dream weaving reading that I did with the Alice the Wonderland and the Cosmic Slumber, and I drew in all these little candles. Actually, I just drew one and copied and pasted them because, you know, why not? I can. It's digital. And then I have my reflections on the reading. Again, this was my this week, the kind of wrap up for the week. My Sunday spread with the True Heart Intuitive. Again, these are all on my public Facebook group. Then our next week here with the Gaian and the Earth Wisdom. This was an In All Things spread. Again, I think that came from my Instagram originally. I think those are all still on my website too. And you can see in that one I used the, hopefully you can see, hopefully it's showing up on camera, I have no idea, the Divine Circus with the Joie de Vivre. This was a really fun one because clearly I spent a lot of time coloring on this page and I kind of used it like a coloring book. So I did my reading and I wrote my reflections, and then I was honestly just sitting here playing around with it later on that evening, and I kind of treated it like a coloring book and just colored in these, made this little thing down at the bottom. I was just kind of pulling in elements from those two cards and moving it into the bottom, basically treating it like a coloring book. So then that's pretty much it. Then we have, you know, the weekly wrap up again, and that's pretty much what my new tarot planner looks like. I do kind of love it. I love that I have these 3 dedicated sections now. I have all my readings by month. I've really enjoyed this one. I'm also working on a spread one because why not? So it's been really fun to move everything over to this. I like the extra pages. You could certainly do this with any sort of digital document. You don't need to have a specific tarot related one, but this one I really enjoyed because it's, you know, set up the way that I like it, and it's my aesthetic and all that kind of good stuff, which makes it work well for me. I always try to make this look pretty, and there's just too many decks to really make that work. So there you go. That is all the decks that I worked with the exception of my moon decks, which I don't tend to mention unless I've changed them, which I really haven't. I'm still working with the same decks for my full and new moon reading, which is primarily my Lioness Oracle Tarot, my Moonchild, and my Star Child, all of which I have videos of on my channel. So I tend not to mention those unless they change, because I am still working with those decks primarily for my full and new moon readings, just as I am still working with the Wildwood for my seasonal readings and my turns of the year. Again, I am going to do a full video on that, probably closer to the end of maybe wrapping up that practice with it. So since those don't really change, I don't really talk about them every single month, but if they do change, I will mention it in the months that I end up using something different. But for May, these were the decks that I worked with, which is really fantastic. I really enjoyed working with the Gaian. I enjoyed getting to know the True Heart. The Earth Wisdom's always one of my favorites, as is the Gentle Tarot and the Roots and Wings. These 3 were so much fun. I so enjoyed working with the Alice the Wonderland. It's definitely earned itself a place in my tarot library and in my practice, as did the Joie de Vivre and the Cosmic Slumber. I have material to make bags for these, which I'm really excited about. And then of course we have my one deck disappointment, my FOMO deck. So we'll just lay that little one right there because it was a deck that I didn't really work with, but learned a very valuable lesson from. So that is it for me today. I hope that you all had a wonderful May, and I wish you many blessings moving into June. I cannot believe we are pretty much halfway through the year now. It is crazy to me. As always, you'll find links for everything I have talked about here in the description box below. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.